If we're lucky, long-range artillery will bombard military bases and highly populated areas in Seoul, snuffing out hundreds of thousands of lives in a matter of hours. As the DMZ becomes a war zone swarmed by an overwhelming ground force, a fleet of Cold War-era prop planes choke the skies, dropping elite special forces soldiers on the other side of the South Korean border, where they engage in sabotage and tactical elimination of key targets. Meanwhile, the rest of the world scrambles to figure out what's going on and prepares for an all-out war. And if we're unlucky, the DPRK lets a nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missile off the chain, activating the United States' nuclear umbrella and perhaps even triggering the end of the world as we know it. Either of these could be North Korea's plan for offensive war, hoping to dominate and reabsorb the US's key ally, South Korea. But which devastating outcome is more likely? And is a potential war avoidable or inevitable? In July 2023, Kim Jong-un stood proudly at the head of the Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang. Red and blue filled the square, with thousands of soldiers coming together in an incredibly tightly choreographed display of unity, discipline, and strength. Flanking the North Korean leader were representatives from Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chinese Communist Party Politburo member Li Hongzhong. The Victory Day Parade marked the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, and it was Kim Jong-un's chance to send a message to the world. His nation is only growing stronger. On the world stage, the disarmament of nuclear weapons has been an ongoing project since the end of the Cold War. Even the long-standing differences between the US and Russia have often been put aside in pursuit of the goal of reducing the number of nuclear weapons in the world. But one country's been working as hard as they can to move in the opposite direction. In January 2023, North Korea's rubber-stamped government passed a bill that included yet another year of high military spending. North Korea's economic struggles are no secret to the rest of the world, despite Kim Jong-un's best efforts to pretend otherwise. Yet, they have continued to invest heavily in defense. The U.S. State Department's 2021 World Military Expenditures and Armed Transfers report estimates that in 2019, North Korea spent around $4 billion on its military, roughly 26% of the country's overall GDP. One of the biggest focuses of the spending is the investment in aggressively expanding the Hermit Kingdom's nuclear arsenal. 2022 saw North Korea conducting a record number of weapon tests. It's believed they fired over 70 missiles across the calendar year. The purpose of these tests was apparent, so much so that the government explicitly stated what they were being conducted for: to simulate attacks on South Korea, Japan, and the United States. Of the 70 missile tests, a number were ICBMs, which stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles. For a long time, nuclear-capable ICBMs were believed to be out of North Korea's reach. The United States, Russia, China, France, India, the United Kingdom, Israel, and Iran were believed to be the only countries with the capability to launch an intercontinental weapon of that type. In 2012, North Korea proudly showed off a number of ICBMs in their Victory Day Parade, which drew heavy scrutiny on the world stage. A team of German weapons experts analyzing the photos picked up on small details like bolts not being secured properly, the noses of the missiles undulating as they were moved, and a lack of consistency from one missile to the next. News articles quickly spread across the Western world, claiming the missiles were fakes, and the general public found the situation mildly amusing. But now, 11 years later, it's clear the situation has changed. At the height of Kim Jong-un's Victory Day Parade in July 2023, two trucks carrying Hwasong-17s and Hwasong-18 missiles made an appearance at Pyongyang. This time, they're very much real. The Hwasong-18 missile, North Korea's newest model, has been tested twice in 2023, both times successfully traveling over 1,000 kilometers. But why are we focusing on these missiles specifically? That's because ICBMs are usually armed with nuclear warheads, and what they lack in accuracy, they more than make up for in range, and sometimes the ability to pack multiple warheads in just one missile. These missiles are designed to hit large targets like major cities, and those equipped with multiple independently targeting warheads can even take out multiple cities by themselves. Chemical and biological payloads could also be packed into these missiles, though they have never been used for that purpose before. Since the 1970s, North Korea has been steadily building a stockpile of chemical weapons, which the International Crisis Group estimated in 2009 to be somewhere in the range of 2,500 to 5,000 metric tons of material. If this report is accurate, it would make North Korea's stockpile the third largest in the world behind the US and Russia. So, where could North Korea hit with their Hwasong-18 missile? Their claim is anywhere in the United States. It's difficult to estimate the number of nuclear missiles that North Korea has. Most put it in the range of 40 to 50, but some reports have that number at over 100. This is clearly no longer an idle threat from a country incapable of inflicting real damage. the situation has changed. Another new technology that North Korea has invested heavily in is drones. We've seen in the war in Ukraine how much of a difference consumer-grade drones carrying grenades have made to the battlefield. But North Korea has set its sights on something bigger. This year's Victory Day parade saw flyovers from their brand new unmanned reconnaissance and combat drones. These UAVs seem to be based closely on the large U.S. Global Hawk and the medium-sized U.S. Reaper, and clearly they are stable enough to sustain flight. However, flight is often the simplest system required in a drone. Targeting sensors, data links, and engines, there are a number of very technical components housed in military's UAVs that require a great deal of development. While North Korea committed to upping its drone capabilities in 2021, it may be too soon for them to have developed these complex systems, unless, of course, they've received outside help. Which brings us back to the two men standing shoulder to shoulder with Kim Jong-un at the parade. It was the first time that a Chinese delegate had attended a North Korean parade since before the COVID-19 pandemic. But you would have to go all the way back to 1991 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union for the last time a Russian representative attended. North Korea has been an outspoken proponent of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and according to the state-run news agency Korean Central News Agency, KCNA, North Korean Defense Minister Kang Soon-nam expressed Pyongyang's full support for the just struggle of the Russian army and people to defend the sovereignty and security of their country during the visit. Both North Korea and Russia have denied reports that allege that North Korea has been sending weapons to support the Ukrainian war effort. Yet at the dinner, KCNA reports that Kim Sun-nam read out a message from Vladimir Putin himself, thanking the country for its, quote, support. While Russia and China had previously distanced themselves from North Korea's nuclear program, it appears there's been a sea change, possibly due to rising tensions with the U.S. and the invasion of Ukraine. Both countries have had a substantial military presence in the sea off the Korean peninsula this year as part of the Northern Interaction 2023, a joint military exercise. The goal, according to the Chinese People's Liberation Army, was to strengthen both sides' capabilities of jointly safeguarding regional peace and stability and responding to various security challenges. What they were responding to is no mystery. At the same time, the United States and South Korea were performing their own joint military exercise. It was the first time a U.S. Navy nuclear-capable ballistic missile submarine made port in the region in over 40 years. Tensions have always been high in this part of the world since the end of the Korean War 70 years ago, but with the successful advancements in ICBMs, nuclear stockpile and drone technology, and their overall military strength, North Korea is no longer a threat that can be ignored. With escalating tensions between the West, Russia, and China, the latter parties are clearly starting to view Kim Jong-un as a powerful ally. So, what happens in a worst-case scenario? What would it look like if North Korea actually went to war? Worryingly, this may be more likely than a lot of the world realizes. In 2018, former head of NATO, Navy Admiral James Stavridis, estimated there is a roughly 10% chance of a nuclear war between the US and North Korea, and a 20 to 30% chance of a smaller-scale conflict that would kill over 1 million people. Since then, the situation has of course changed. Donald Trump is no longer in office, COVID-19 has ravaged the world, and Russia has invaded Ukraine. But what has remained consistent throughout the upheaval is North Korea's obsession with building a military capable of attacking the US. The most concerning aspect of a war with North Korea is the main man, Kim Jong-un. As a leader, he's proven to be obsessed with his own personal image and survival. Growing ties between Japan and South Korea only further threaten his rule, and he sees the trilateral US-South Korea-Japanese partnership as a threat to North Korea itself. With constant internal threats as well to his power, he's worked hard to continue the cult of personality started by his grandfather. The bizarre inner workings of North Korea are enough to show anyone that this is a leader who thinks and behaves very differently from the rest of the world. With Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, there have been the occasional concerns about the use of nuclear weapons rumbling beneath the surface, but that's all they've been. Putin has demonstrated that he's happy to keep his nuclear weapons as a deterrent and nothing more for the time being. At no stage in this war have there been real fears of him using any nuclear warheads on Ukraine, but the threat of using them has worked to help the West self-deter from giving Ukraine the aid it truly needs. Kim Jong-un is different. Throughout his time as the leader of North Korea, he has routinely violated international treaties with little regard for the sanctions imposed. The UN inhibits North Korea from nuclear and missile tests, and yet, since 2006, Kim Jong-un has tested nuclear weapons 6 times. The recent ICBM tests also violated those sanctions. He's demonstrated that he has little regard for international treaties and agreements, as well as spent over a decade accumulating a larger and more advanced military force. So it's safe to assume that he would fight a war with real ferocity and few rules. So let's look at a map to get the lay of the land. In the center is North Korea, with its capital Pyongyang here. Immediately surrounding North Korea are China, Japan, Russia, and South Korea. These are the 2nd, 4th, 11th, and 13th largest economies in the world, respectively. Then all the way across the Pacific Ocean is the United States, the largest economy in the world. The most likely thing to happen first in a war with North Korea would be an attack on Seoul, the capital of South Korea. With a population of just under 10 million, due to Seoul's proximity to the Korean border, it's believed that North Korea has amassed a vast number of rocket launchers and artillery pieces within range of the city. The Congressional Research Service believes up to 10,000 rockets per minute could be fired at the capital. Even the most advanced air defense systems in the world would be overwhelmed by such a barrage. If such an attack were to occur, roughly 300,000 people would be killed on the first day of the conflict. It is entirely possible that as part of that attack, North Korea would deploy chemical or biological weapons on Seoul as well. A report from the U.S. Department of Defense found that they have the capability to produce nerve, blister, blood, and choking agents, including mustard gas and anthrax. The fear with these kinds of attacks is that they would be much harder to detect until it was too late. A single covert agent could very easily make their way into a bustling population center in Seoul. With just 1 kilogram of anthrax and a sprayer, they could administer a lethal dose to hundreds of thousands of people, even up to 1 million, from just one individual. And that's not to mention the methods of getting it into the water supply or pumping it through the sewers. There's a reason these types of weapons are banned internationally. They deliver devastation on an almost unimaginable scale. This is all assuming that he decides not to deploy a nuclear weapon at this stage of the conflict, which is far from guaranteed. While other world leaders see nuclear weapons as a last resort option, Kim Jong-un may use it as his opening gambit, but more on that later. So if artillery bombardment and biological weapons of mass destruction are included, the death toll could easily surpass 1 million on the first day of conflict. Seoul is a highly international city. Kim Jong-un would not simply have killed that many Koreans, he would have killed citizens from all over the world, sparking international outrage. What would the response be? Well, for starters, it would be rapid. For decades, the US and South Korea have been preparing for this exact situation. The first wave of counterattacks would be conducted by precision artillery, specially trained to destroy North Korean artillery firing on Seoul. South Korea maintains a large number of counter-battery units specifically for this mission, but the sheer number of North Korean artillery means Seoul would still be devastated. With close-in air support from the US and South Korean fixed and rotary aviation, though, North Korea's artillery would eventually be hugely attrited, allowing for the evacuation of Seoul. Next would be a focused air campaign to sever the lines of communication leading to the front and to blunt any armored or infantry thrusts across the DMZ. North Korea has the numbers advantage, with an infantry force roughly 3 times larger than the South's. They also have more tanks, but South Korea has far more modern tanks than the North, which are thus far more capable. Numbers matter all on their own, though, as we've seen from the human wave attacks by Russia and Ukraine. And without immediate air support from the South Korean and American Air Force, the South would likely be forced into a fighting retreat immediately on making contact. At this point, it's all but certain that Japan would join the fray as well, taking part in the second phase of the South's counterpunch. Concurrently with the effort to slow or stop the push into the South, South Korea, the US, and possibly even Japanese special forces would immediately launch a decapitation strike against North Korea's leadership. South Korea and the US have trained extensively for the mission, with US Navy SEALs and South Korea's 13th Special Missions Brigade having a special relationship that stretches back years. With 1,000 of South Korea's most elite soldiers, the 13th Special Missions Brigade, supported by US Special Forces, would be responsible for infiltrating Pyongyang to eliminate Kim Jong-un and his regime. But North Korea is still a formidable military. It's estimated that they have roughly 6,500 armored vehicles, 12,000 artillery pieces, and an enormous 1.2 million man army. While this is a significant force, it pales in comparison to the 500,000 active soldiers with 3.1 million in reserve that the Republic of Korea possesses. In addition, the Republic of Korea is a much richer nation with a significantly more advanced military supported by the US. Victor D. Cha, the former Director for Asian Affairs in the White House's National Security Council, believes that this disparity is what has led to Kim Jong-un's pursuit of long-range missiles and weapons of mass destruction. An all-out ground war would be a lost cause, and so Cha believes that they have pivoted their strategy. Their ultimate goal would be to, quote, unite the Korean peninsula, absorbing the South into the North's regime. Taking all of that land by force would be unrealistic. Instead, they'll likely inflict massive damage to Seoul and other major cities using long-range weapons with the goal of inflicting terror across the country. Smuggled weapons of mass destruction or even the use of nuclear-tipped missiles targeting South Korea's major ports would attempt to sever the nation off of American or Japanese reinforcements. Under constant missile and WMD assault, North Korea would likely try to force the South Korean government to capitulate. Surrounded by China, Russia, and Japan, and with the US and all their allies being so closely involved, and not forgetting all of the international civilians who will have been killed, North Korea will have the world's attention. It could very easily escalate into World War III, which none of the parties involved would want. There will be a vested interest in finding a peaceful agreement from everybody, which now suddenly gives North Korea much more bargaining power than they have had for a very long time. With chemical and biological weapons wreaking destruction on the Republic of Korea, the North will be in a position to weather the storm and make audacious demands. However, it's unlikely any of these demands would be met. While Russia and China would likely support the North's petitions, the Republic of Korea will be staunchly against any kind of unification that would see them subservient to their neighbors. Culturally and ideologically, the two halves of Korea have drifted so far apart over the last few decades that there is a scarce middle ground left. What's more, the wider world, and the US in particular, will not want to be seen negotiating with terrorists. The only solution for them will be a full-scale ground invasion of North Korea with the goal of eliminating Kim Jong-un and the key members of his party. This would be slow, bloody, and require the US to get directly involved in an intensely volatile situation. Remember as well that North Korea has borders with both China and Russia. Both those superpowers would have the ability to support North Korea with weapons, food, fuel, and resources. If the US set foot in the country, would it be long before Russia or China would do the same? Which ultimately brings us back around to the elephant in the room, or rather the 40 to 50, possibly over 100 elephants in the room. North Korea is a nuclear power. There is an element of chaos to this conflict that takes it out of the realm of predictability. The scenario we've just described assumes Kim Jong-un would not choose to fire a nuclear warhead at Seoul. If he did, the US would be forced to retaliate with nuclear weapons, as South Korea enjoys the protection of America's nuclear umbrella. This guarantee ensures that any nuclear attack on a nation protected by the US is considered an attack on America itself. It was meant to deter the proliferation of nuclear weapons during the Cold War, but now it comes with the risk of North Korea launching nuclear weapons at the US as well. If Kim Jong-un holds on to his weapons at first, then he'll likely want to fire them as soon as the US ground forces invade the country. There's something called the use them or lose them principle. He's sunk his country's economic prospects for years, all to build a handful of nuclear weapons. If troops arrive who are going to take them away from him, he's going to be much more likely to fire them, so all of that money and work doesn't go to waste. He'll also believe he has a valid reason to deploy them, given his country is being invaded. If that happens, well, it's the same again, potential nuclear apocalypse. It seems Kim Jong-un has come to the same realization that a lot of badly behaved school kids come to. The teacher can't do anything to you. You can run around, jump on your desk, draw on the whiteboard, and shout all kinds of obscene language right in your teacher's face, and they can't hit you. All they can do is give you detentions and tell you to stop. Rules and treaties only work when everyone acts reasonably and with a good conscience. As soon as a nation starts to do what they want, it's very difficult to stop them when nuclear weapons are involved. Kim Jong-un is only 39 years old. If his health permits, which it may not, he has decades of leadership still ahead of him. And one thing is clear, he has no intention of changing his ways. Now watch why China will collapse if it invades Taiwan, or check out this video instead.